Hi, everyone. My name is Hank Quentz, and I'm here with my friend and fellow author, Anna Faversham, and we're going to talk about her latest book, Beware the Midnight Train. I read this book, and I gave it a five-star rating on Amazon. The funny thing is, I got a notice that Anna had published a new book. So I went to Amazon and grabbed it, and I didn't bother to read the description. So I was quite surprised to find out it was a ghost story, which it clearly says in the description, which I didn't read. So to begin, Anna, what triggered this book? This is a very unusual book. What triggered it?
It's actually based on truth. When I first got married, my husband and I moved into a flint cottage built in 1832, and it was a railway cottage, quite a big one, sort of double fronted and so on. And it was divided into two flats. Well, we moved in and the rent was cheap. It seemed good. When you first married, it's good to have cheap rent. And the folks upstairs were very friendly, a bit wacky. Um, and she said to me one day, have you seen them? So I said, have I seen what? Uh, who? And she said, the ghosts. And she told me about these ghosts who often are at the bottom of her bed, standing, two of them. And she described them. So I went downstairs. I said, no, I haven't seen them. I went downstairs. I spoke to my husband. I said, oh dear, dear, somebody upstairs. And we didn't think too much more about it. It had dodgy electrics, the flat. They were coming and going all the time. But we didn't think much of that. It was a very old cottage. So we then um, had a couple of visitors, as you do when you move in. And my friend said, something wrong with this place. It's cold, it's this, that, and the other. And she said, I can't stay. And it's very odd. And then a man came and he said, did you know you have two ghosts sitting in the television next to you? So I thought, ghosts sitting in television. Right. Okay. So in those days, the televisions were quite wide. Um, and I thought, very strange, but he described them exactly the same as the lady upstairs had. And she worked in a building society, like a bank sort of place. So she was clearly intelligent lady. Um, but he described the same. Now, that's how the book sort of starts. And it's a little bit different because we haven't got a married couple moving in, we've got a single girl moving in. But it goes, I started many, many years later, sort of 40 years later, to think that maybe I should write about this. I'd always wondered, why were they there? I didn't see them. I have never seen them. To this day, I've never seen them. But why were they there? Well, we had them moved out. Let's put it like that. We called in the vicar, and the vicar told them where to go nicely. Um, and there, all the electrics were fine, and everything was fine. And that was the trigger, was truth. Now, for other books, the triggers are completely different. For instance, Immortality, which is speculative fiction, the guy got in my head. I called him Chester, and he was spilling out the story, and I thought, oh dear, this is very odd and quite annoying. Um, it wouldn't go away, and every quiet time he was there spelling out his story until I finally knew I had to tell it. Charlotte Bronte wrote, but this I know, the writer who possesses the creative gift owns something that, at times, strangely wills and works for itself. Be the work grim or glorious, dread or divine, you have little choice left but quiescent adoption. As for you, the nominal artist, your share in it has been to work passively under dictates you neither delivered nor could question. Now, a lot of people would say, how very odd, that can't be right. But I was very relieved to read this and find that I'm not the only one who feels compelled to tell a story. And Chester kind of compelled me to tell the story. So one trigger is based on truth. The other trigger was something in my head that had to be told. And all of my other books are more like that. A story that comes in my head has to be told. So that's the triggers.
That's pretty amazing that that this actually happened. Two different people saw ghosts that you couldn't see and described them exactly the same. That kind of like beggars the belief.
Um, we went to New Zealand shortly afterwards. I mean, we didn't exactly run away from the ghosts and things like that. But when we got there, the first person we met said uh, he met us from the ship. We went out by ship, and he said, "Well, the good thing about New Zealand is we don't have ghosts here." And I went immediately. you know, I, it was just one of those things. It happened. I know from experience now that people do see ghosts. There are ghosts, if that's the way you want to think of it. I don't have a problem with that. And I've spoken to many people who have had experience of ghosts. As to you, Hank, I don't know your experience, but I've not seen them.
I don't know if we have ghosts around here. I haven't heard of any ghost stories in the New York area, but maybe. But anyway,
Yes.
what this is an unusual book. What kind of problems did you have with it, writing it?
Um, well, I think writing any book, particularly this is time travel. It's not just so you can tell that although it begins with a base of truth, it moves to time travel, which obviously isn't true. So, yet anyway. Um, and so anything where you go back in time and you're not writing in your own time, you've got to do a lot of fact checking.
Mhm.
And I find that now this book, One Dark Night, this is set in 1815, 18, something like that. To have a look at what it's set in there. I think it's 1813 even. So it's the Regency times. Well, that one's won a Reader's Favourite Book Award. So it's got a little gold thing there. So, and that was the first one that I ever wrote. And it didn't get the book award until many moons later, many years later. So I would say to anybody watching who thinks, setting out on their first book, don't give up. Sometimes you can get rewarded a little bit further down the line. But the problem with this was I set it in Victorian times because I was determined that I was going to change from this is time travel as well. And the time travel is because um, they go through the caves in Margate, which is, I grew up near there and I visited the caves when I was about 11 or so, and I've never forgotten them. Never, ever forgotten the caves where the smugglers were. So the smuggling caves come in there, but they come into time travel as the medium for going in in the 21st century and coming out in the 19th century, or coming the other way, changing the century. So I have come across the problem of having to research different times. It's all right writing in your own time, these contemporary novels, contemporary, that was easy in the sense that, as I said, this person in my head was just pushing it through. I just seemed to need to tap, 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 get it down. But this, problems that arise in all of them is finding the time. If you're working in any way, it must be pretty hard. If you're not working, it's still pretty hard. I've found 14 hours a week is what I ring fence. So that's one of the problems, is finding the time. And then also you have the interruptions. So there I am, tapping away with my head in the Victorian times or Regency times, and the telephone goes, either on my mobile or the home phone, and I think, what? Because I'm in the 19th century. I've got people in long dresses and top hats and things like that, and all of a sudden there's this bell ringing. That takes a little while, and I usually then have to go make a cup of tea and then get settled down again to do carry on writing. And let's see, what else do I do? There's interruptions. There's making sure that you're not using words that weren't around then. Ken Follett, who has sold 190 million books around, I was watching something that he was talking about, and he said he used a word that seemed to be all right 2 centuries ago, kind of thing. But I think it must have been some kind of historian wrote into him to say, no, that meant something completely different in those days. So it can be pretty awful if you are hoping to say one thing, but the word that you've used jumps out at some people as being incorrect or even not being used. For anybody that wants to avoid that, what I do is use a site called Etymonline, which is etymology online. So the history, the origins of the word, I can look up, and if it says, it usually gives when it was first used. So that helps me. But there's all that sort of thing. I wouldn't say it's a problem, but it certainly holds you up.
Yeah, I never thought of that.
And you've got,
Been talking about in the past, let's say 100 or 150 years, that the language they use back there is different than the language we use here. I know there's some words that go out of style, but there's the words that are still in style has different meaning, and it never occurred to me.
yeah. One of the things that people in England say is that we get these Americanisms coming in, and we then adopt them. Now, really, that is not the whole story. Because if you go, I discover this when I go back researching, and this is why I've come to love research, is that, in fact, it's not the Americans who are inventing these words. The Americans are holding on to the original and the original spellings. And I first noticed the word honor. In English, we spell it Honour, and in America, of course, it's Honor, which is perfectly sensible. Where we've got our U from, I don't know. My son's very old school, which was courtesy of Edward the Sixth, King Edward the Sixth, set up a school, and so it's a very, very old one, and something like 1552, I think. Over that, it's over a gateway was an arch with the word honor on it, HONOR, no U. So the Americans took, as when you left our shores a long time ago, and you kept the language true.
Yeah,
It is us who have often, it's the British, in case anybody hasn't realised, I'm British. It's the
actually,
British who have made things different.
you can actually have things spelled. You can say, write the story using British spelling on it over here.
Mm.
And, all color is, we do the same thing. You have a U, we don't. There's a whole series of words that we spell differently than you. And has led to dictionaries or, software programs that say you want American or British spelling.
Yes, yeah.
Specify which one you want.
I'm also hanging on to some of our British older spellings. Um, uh, the word realize, I think it's Microsoft who decided on the spell checker. It changed everything where there was a Z to an S. I can't say everything, but the word realize was always realize with a Z, and anybody reasonably educated used that. But along comes the spell checker and makes it Realise. Now, there's a famous writer whose name escapes me now, who writes the Morse books. And one of the clues as to who done it was because I think it went like this, that he spelt it with a Z, and that meant he had gone to Cambridge, or perhaps it was the other way around. He spelt it with an S, and that meant that he had not gone to Cambridge University, which is what he was saying he did. Something like that. And that stuck in my head, and I thought, it's only quite recently that we've changed, but you are hanging on to our Zs,
Yes.
and so am I. So when an American reads my books, they've got some American spellings and some English spellings. So, but you can't please everyone all of the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So let's, what's your next project?
6 months off.
That's good.
I honestly, I have said I'm not going to do anything, and I put it in my diary, my 2025 diary, that I'm having 6 months off because I need to catch up on all sorts of other things. I'm trying to write my memories of my life, so that if anything were to happen to me, every time we go on a plane or something like that, I think I haven't done those memories that I want to pass on to my children, so they have some idea of their background, where they've researched it all. They all do these days, but I'm going to get these memories done. And
I
I'm
thought
half
about
done.
doing that for my grandkids, but every time I started, I get so bored. I said, no, I can't do this. My life was dull. They'll never read it. It's better.
I have I have to say that if I start talking to some people, they say that I have obviously had a most adventurous life. And I mean, like the ghosts, sort of thing, that there is sort of nothing that I haven't come across in one way or another, which is marvelous for a writer. I mean, we went to New Zealand, and then from New Zealand we went to Africa, and we lived in the bush. Now, I haven't written anything about Africa, basically because when I got back to London, um, Africa was a world away, and I found it quite difficult. But I know I've always kept diaries. I know I've got diaries of Africa, and I'm going to dig those out in this 6 months off and remember some of the things that happened there, which are quite unbelievable.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. There was a Bible verse, there is a Bible verse, which I found it taught me so much in that it's in one of the Psalms and it says, God will protect you from the stones in your pathway. Well, great, we're going to have shoes or we're going to, but even if I extend that to God's going to protect us from the difficulties we come across. When I discussed this with Africans, they said, oh, no. For us, it means God will protect us from the witch doctor. What? The witch doctor. Because the witch doctor leaves stones in the pathway with a message, and often that message is you are about to die or something pretty awful. So the verse means that one thing to one person and one thing to another, and it taught me a lot. Yes, about how God can speak to you, but as well as that, it speaks of different people take different things from what is written.
They interpret it their way. They interpret it through their own mind and their own experiences.
That's right. Yes. So that for me was from Africa was one of the lessons I'll never forget.
Yeah.
And it makes me try to write very clearly. I try to think of that and write so that it can't be misunderstood.
How are they going to misinterpret my words? Well, we got to wrap this up. Any closing words? Any closing bits of wisdom for the listeners?
Closing words. If you have to write. It's really, if you love writing, keep on writing. Another thing Ken Follett said was that he wrote the first 10 books he wrote fell flat, flopped, complete flops. 10 books, Ken Follett. So if you've only written, as I have, 7 or 8, don't despair, keep going. And maybe a little bit further along the line, they'll get picked up. I mean, maybe once we're dead and buried for 100 years, they might get picked up. But keep going, and find a little bit of help. I write, I edit my own, I format my own, I upload it myself. The only thing I don't do is my covers, which is done by a gifted friend. And so I enjoy the whole process. I actually enjoy the whole process. But it does take time.
Yeah.
But if you can do it, if you can work, if you want to go traditionally published, be prepared for many, many rejections. If not, try Amazon or self-published. But don't have vanity publishing where you pay a lot of money and you don't get. But Hank, you've got so much that you're contributing to writers.
Yeah, well, I try.
Yes, you do, and I've looked at your books recently and seen how helpful they could be to new writers or existing writers.
Yeah, I try to keep them for at the beginner's level, how to for first-time people.
Yes.
Self-publishing is really complex, and creating a novel is really complex also. So I try and help
Yes.
people out by sharing my experiences and my understanding of how things went, what problems I had to solve.
What was your biggest problem?
With writing, it's with fiction writing anyway, is too many ideas. Um, and I've learned that, a story idea by itself is pretty worthless. A story idea with an ending is golden, and that's the problem, getting an ending to the story idea. So I
Mhm.
think that's something that you have to learn through experience that, unless someone tells you. If you haven't heard that, you just struggle with all these story ideas, and many of them are, like I said, useless because you can't come up with an ending.
That's funny. I start with a start and I have an ending and I have to connect them.
Well, eventually I get an idea and an ending, and then the same thing, I have to connect them. But I don't start
Yeah.
writing it until I can get an ending. And speaking of endings, we're about out of time, Anna. So thank you for sharing time with me.
Lovely to meet you.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
bye.
Bye.